Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Home Alone on Thanksgiving, submitted by Larry Defense. This happened in 2017. I'd been married for 7 years and we had 2 wonderful children, and we just moved into a new house and we were redoing a lot of it. Scratch that. I was redoing a lot of it. When I mean a lot of stuff, I mean a lot of stuff. There are some things that I won't do on my own, like electrical and plumbing. I know the basics, but also know my limits. But I am very good at roughing, drywalling, finishing, and that sort of stuff. The place wasn't really a fixer-upper, but there were things that I wanted to change immediately, and that included a revamped finished basement, and they also had this large patio on the back of the house that I wanted to turn into an additional family room. The reasoning behind that was because there was also another patio off the patio for our pool, so it could serve as a new family room off of our existing family room, and also kind of a pool house. I don't mean to waste a lot of time talking about that specific project, but it does play a huge role into what happened here. That year I'd been working full-time, doing this stuff for the kids, but also working late into the nights and also very long weekends on the house. I wanted everything done by Christmas, and that included a lot of other stuff inside. But this room was important to me because I was putting in a wood-burning fireplace, and it was going to be where our Christmas tree and all that stuff was. Suffice it to say, with 2 little kids in school and working long hours, it didn't take long for me to come down with something, and of course it came right before Thanksgiving. Normally we would host Thanksgiving for my brothers and my in-laws, but with the house ripped up and me being sick, my in-laws decided to take over, and as much as I was sad I was going to miss it, I decided to hang back and just sit on my ass and try to get better. It sounds funny, but as a 25-year-old I would have laughed at such a thing. But now that I'm in my early 30s, I know how important health is, and as much as I was bummed to miss a holiday, I wanted to be healthy for the next one. So my family took off to my in-laws about an hour away, and I was just going to chill in front of the TV, watch football, eat some soup, and just relax. As run down and as tired as I was also feisty and wanting to do something, so I thought I would also clean 2 of my handguns while I watched TV. Normally something I would do in my shop in the basement, but no one was home, so what the hell. And I'm glad I made that decision. I laid a towel down on a TV tray, broke out my kit, and got to work on my S&W 686. I keep my handguns very clean and locked up for those of you wondering, but I had been shooting this one and another my wife had purchased for me for my birthday lately at the range, so I just wanted to keep them tip-top too. While I was working, I noticed a draft coming from the door that would be my French doors, leading to the newly formed family room. There was also another set of French doors going out to the backyard, and one of them had been giving me trouble. I had set the frame incorrectly and was waiting for a buddy to come over to help me fix it, but for some reason the door handles just wouldn't stick. Sometimes the doors would open, at least one of them was not locked with the deadbolt at the ceiling. I got up after finishing my 686 and checked on it. Sure enough, the door was open. I went over cursing myself for not doing it right the first time, closed the door, and fiddled with the handles until I knew it was secure. I went back to my chair and continued on with my H&K VP9. This was the new one my wife had just purchased for me, and I liked it a lot. I've never been a big 9mm guy, but I love this handgun. Normally, I would have put these 2 right back in the safe, but being home alone, not feeling great, and let's face it, lazy, I left them on an end table next to me and cleaned up my tools. Then I went and got a bowl of soup and some water, and sat back down to eat. My wife texted me and asked how I was doing, and that they were thinking about staying overnight at her parents' house. I texted her that I was fine and feeling a little better, and that was fine as well if she wanted to stay. About 5 in the afternoon, I started to doze off. Probably a mixture of the medicine I was taking and the fact that I was just whipped. For some reason, I thought I would have fallen asleep earlier in the day, but I hadn't. When I woke up, it was about 6:30. The house was totally dark, and I had turned the TV off before I drifted off, but I noticed it was chilly in the room. I immediately thought, that fucking door again. and slowly decided to go and fix it again. That's when I heard a sigh off to my right. At first I thought it was just in my head, but as I sat there listening, I heard it again. It wasn't like a light sigh like someone was sad. It was the sound of someone who sounded like they were tired, or maybe they were hurt. I peered through the darkness of the room and saw something as my eyes adjusted. There are some blue lights on our refrigerator, which were across the room in this open concept area we have. They're not super bright, but they do give off a little bit of light in the kitchen. What caught my attention and immediately shocked me into reality was the fact that they went away for a second, and then came back. Like someone had leaned forward in my view and blocked the lights for a second. Between us was the end table and a lamp, but I remember just that morning my oldest had told me the bulb was out in the lamp. Reality was coming crashing in on me pretty hard. There was someone sitting in the same room as me in my house. What the hell was going on? I slowly reached over and grabbed what I realized quickly was my VP9. Mind you, neither of my firearms were loaded, but for some reason that made me feel a hell of a lot better anyway. Before I made a move or said anything, I tried to take stock of the whole situation. It was pitch black. There was clearly another human being sitting on my couch maybe 6 feet from me, and I had no idea who it was. I reached down and instinctively with my left hand felt my phone in my pajama pocket. That was good. I'd be able to call for help if I needed to, and it was increasingly becoming clear that I would. I quietly cleared my throat, cycled my pistol, and said in as much of a disarming voice as I could, "Excuse me, who the fuck are you?" There was silence. That little sigh came again, and I repeated, "You'd better tell me who the fuck you are before you take one in the chest. I know you can't see me, but I am pointing a 9mm in your direction." Again, there was silence. I slowly reached for my phone, and as quick as I activated it and pressed down on the flashlight button, what I saw was disturbing. There was a man sitting in my couch with no shirt on, and a huge cut from his shoulder all the way down to his hip, left to right. He wasn't really bleeding, but he certainly had been, and I could tell that it had happened some point today because while he wasn't gushing blood, the blood did look fresh and it had dried and coagulated a bit across the entire injury. He didn't move and didn't even look at me, his eyes closed, and he made that sighing noise again. I quickly ran to the other side of the room and turned on the light that was on another end table, and now I could see everything. This guy was really banged up. He looked like he had just had his ass kicked 6 ways from Sunday, and I immediately fumbled to dial 911. I kept my pistol trained on him as I spoke frantically to the operator as to what was happening. She took my info and asked a whole bunch of questions about the guy I couldn't answer, like who he was, why he was there, was he breathing? Well, that one I could answer. And I kept just repeating to get someone out here, and more likely that an ambulance. The woman said that, yes, that was in progress and that I should stay right where I was. I did tell her that I had a pistol in my hand and tried to say under my breath that I didn't have it loaded, without this guy hearing. I didn't want him knowing that, even though he didn't look like he was in any shape to start anything with me. I told her to tell the people on their way to come to my backyard and come through my family room door, as that's how I figured he got in. She said the officers would do that, and then we could open the front door or whatever for emergency services. She told me to stay on the phone with her, and that's when I heard a noise from behind me. It was a scuffling sound coming from my family room. Without telling her what was going on, I turned and looked over my shoulder, and standing at the French doors to this family room that we were in were 2 faces. 2 men looking in. I yelled out to them, "Who the fuck are you?" And the dispatcher asked what was going on, and I yelled, "There's 2 guys outside my door looking at me." I took my pistol aim off the guy on the couch and pointed it at them. I yelled out again, "Who the fuck are you?" They took one look at me, and one guy said in a pretty loud voice, "Fuck Shorty, fuck this shit." Then they turned around and ran out of my new family room. I'm not going to talk about what kind of tough guy I am, I'm not. I almost pissed my pants. I've got one guy sitting here in my family room, 2 guys outside in my new family room, no bullets in my pistol, and I'm going out of my head. Thankfully, we do live in suburbia, and the police showed up in less than 8 minutes. They announced their presence and came to my back door, and I held up my hand with my pistol, and they said to walk back towards the wall with the doors, and I did. They came in, and one officer said, "Slowly put the pistol down," and I did. By now I had set my phone down as well, and they began asking what was going on. I told them everything, and that neither of my pistols were loaded, and that I had just fallen asleep. And that's when this guy showed up. I told them about my back door, and that's the only way I figured he got in. The guy was completely unresponsive, and he was unresponsive as well when we let the emergency guys in. They immediately got him to a gurney and into an ambulance, and the police asked me tons of questions. I answered them all as best I could. I told them I was home by myself with my family out of town, that I was battling being sick, and that I had no idea who this guy was, other than that the other guy who showed up at the house looking for him called him Shorty. Turns out there was a report of 3 guys breaking into a house a few blocks from mine. One of the guys, when accosted, jumped out a window, and they were pretty sure it was the guy with the giant cut across his chest. Somehow he had made it over to my house, and in his stupor opened the back door. He just came in and sat down, not knowing I was in the room because it was completely dark. How his buddies found him, I have no idea. So yeah, the police left after a while, and they said they'd be following up. I told them I was available for whatever, and one of the officers joked that I'd really better get my shit together and fix my back door, despite saying how safe our town is. Needless to say, my phone call to my wife was a little more than energetic. Suddenly I was feeling much, much better. She was worried but happy I was safe. I immediately went out that night and put 2 braces up against the door and nailed them into the floor for the time being. I would only be home alone for the rest of the night, but I would be damned if that door opened again. I will say this again, something that I never do. I slept with my VP9 loaded that night. The police told me there was little chance of the other guys coming back, but I wasn't taking any chances. So yeah, that was my scary, fucked up story from a few Thanksgivings back. This year's Thanksgiving, I hope, will be as good as last year. I know it can't be any more crazy than that one. Something at Our Cabin, submitted by Charlie P. It was 2006, and my family decided to have Thanksgiving at our hunting cabin in the Mark Twain National Forest in the Ozarks. There are only 3 cabins near one another where we are located, and still are, and it's really a slice of heaven. That year it was going to be just my immediate family and my grandfather, as my grandmother had just passed away, and a lot of our relatives had spent a good amount of time in our area when that happened. My grandfather didn't feel like traveling anywhere else, and that cabin was one of his favorite places. So it was just me, my brother Rick, my sister Annie, my mom, my dad, and my grandfather. It's a very cozy cabin with 2 bedrooms. It's not a shack like a lot of guys like to go hunting in. This was an extremely well-built family-owned cabin that's been in our family since the late 60s. We got there the night before Thanksgiving and did a lot of prep work late into the night. We were going to deep fry a turkey. My mom had made her famous venison stew, and we had all the trimmings and extras for a great Thanksgiving feast. We did have a satellite dish out there, but this year the TV stayed off. We all just sat around listening to music and talking and playing cards. It seemed like a time for Thanksgiving with no distractions, and just family. I was 14 at the time and helping my dad with the turkey. We normally ate around 4, but this year for some reason things were a little off. Probably because we were all just enjoying our time together and taking things very slow and easy. I should say the night before did have something that kind of set up what we should have been paying attention to. My brother, who was 10 at the time, woke up at about 2:30 in the morning, and then in turn woke me and my dad up. He said he heard something outside the cabin walking around and making some really loud grunting noises. We told him it was probably just a big buck checking things out, but he said no, it was bigger than that, and he was positive that a dark shape had moved across the window of our bunk room. My dad said again it was just a deer and that we needed to go back to sleep. We did, and in the morning my brother grabbed me and said, "Let's go outside and look around." I got dressed and followed him outside, and we looked all along the side of the cabin and saw that something certainly had been out there, but had walked up and down the cabin so much that the grass that was wet in the evening and night was just matted down. There was no way to tell what animal was out there because it had paced back and forth so much. I told him it was just a big buck probably trying to scratch his side on the cabin, but in my gut knew that wasn't true because we would have heard it scratching. We went back inside and just started helping out getting everything else ready for the day. Later in the afternoon, when my dad started getting things going for the deep-fried turkey, we were just standing in the back talking about life, and my dad was going on and on about how much he appreciated life the older that he got. He was pretty emotional about my grandmother passing, and it was just a good conversation between he, me, and my grandfather. Obviously, my grandfather was upset about my grandma too, but the stoic old guy always kept it together. My dad told me to go inside and get my grandpa and him a beer, and told me that I could grab one too. It was one of those kind of moments, a real guy thing. After things were all set up out there, we went back inside to hang out while the turkey cooked. That's when we heard a very loud howl off in the distance. My grandfather looked at my dad, and I looked at both of them. "What was that?" I asked. I'd been coming out to the cabin since I was 3, and had been hunting with my dad and grandfather for many, many years. I'd never heard a sound like that before. My grandfather broke the silence with, "Sounds like a Bigfoot," and we all burst into laughter. I then started to ask him about all the Bigfoot stories that he knew, and he had plenty. Bigfoot tales in the Ozarks are like flies on poop. They're everywhere. It seems everyone has their story, but no one in my family or circle of friends had ever experienced anything like that anywhere in the woods. We were still chuckling about it when my dad went out to check on the turkey and came back and said it would be ready in half an hour. The rest of us kept playing cards and talking and having a good time when the howl came again. It was much closer than it had been before, and this time my dad looked up with a look of concern on his face. He put his hand to his chin and said, It was dark now. My dad was going to switch on the floodlight to the backyard of our cabin when we heard a massive howl right behind our place. I mean, it was the loudest howl/screech I had ever heard in my entire life. My dad ran to our locked gun rack, unlocked it, and took off his .30-30. There were shells right above the rack, and he jammed a box into his pocket and chambered around. My mom had screamed loudly, which of course made my little sister scream too. My brother and I jumped out of our chairs when we heard that scream. My dad looked at us and said, "Don't anyone move," and he went to the back door. We all sat there watching him open the door slowly and raising his rifle before he took a step outside. Everything was dead silent. The music had stopped, and we could just hear one another breathing. By now my grandfather and I had gotten up, not listening to my father, and we followed him towards the door. My dad yelled out, "Shit!" and we saw what he was talking about. The turkey fryer had been knocked over. He jumped towards it and turned off the gas, but then stopped short. "Where's the freaking bird?" he asked out loud. There was no turkey near the spilled fryer. That's when we heard the howl again at the edge of the woods in our yard. My dad raised his rifle in the direction where he thought it was coming from, and everything was silent again. My sister did scream again in the cabin, and my mom told her to be quiet. Everything was dead calm once again, and we all scoured the darkness towards the edge of the light in our yard. Finally, my dad started to lower the rifle when he jerked it back up and said, "What in God's name is that?" We all looked in the direction of where the barrel of his rifle was pointing, and at the edge of our yard we saw a giant dark figure standing at the edge of the forest. This thing looked like it was 10 feet tall. I'm sure it wasn't that tall, but it was massive. I mean, it honestly looked like a wooden statue standing there. And there in the darkness, lit up only by the floodlight, we could see our Thanksgiving turkey dangling from one massive hand or paw or whatever. The thing was covered in hair. My dad shot the rifle, a wild shot nowhere near this thing, and everyone yelled out with my mom and sister inside screaming. This thing never flinched. It just stood there and then made another howl, not as loud as before. and then it just turned and stomped off into the woods. We all stood there, standing in shock. I mean, for crying out loud, we had just been laughing at Bigfoot stories, and now this. All those people I thought were kooks making stuff up, well, open mouth, insert foot. We had just seen something we had never seen before, and the only explanation was Bigfoot. Everything calmed down, and my dad said, "Everyone back in the cabin." We all went in and locked the door, and sat near the fireplace talking about what had just happened. My mom was very upset about the turkey. My brother was terrified that this thing would come back. I was secretly hoping it would, and my grandfather just summed it up and said, "Well, wasn't that something?" So that year we never had turkey for Thanksgiving, just my mom's awesome venison stew and all the other fixings. Nothing else happened for the rest of the night nor the next day. I haven't really told anyone this story other than my close friends. I don't want anyone thinking I'm some kind of whack job. But the fact of the matter is, my dad and grandfather saw what I saw too, and the rest of my family certainly heard it. As I get older and look back at all of this, cherishing the memories of our cabin and the memories to come, I can smile. I'm thankful for my family, I'm thankful for our hunting cabin, and I'm thankful for what I saw. And I'd like to think that that Bigfoot, or whatever it was thankful for us to providing a meal that Thanksgiving. By the way, we never saw or heard anything like that ever again. Okay, gang, as is tradition, let's end this Thanksgiving with a couple of funny ones. Whoops by Steel34. I have a rather large family on my father's side. He's number 3 of 10 siblings, and all of the siblings have multiple children, my cousins. While talking to my female cousin about where she was going to go to school, her newest boyfriend took offense to my questioning. Why? He thought I was another guy trying to hit on his girl. Mind you, there were 60+ people at this Thanksgiving gathering. I kindly said, "Hey man, she's my cousin, don't worry about it." And I smiled, trying to be cordial. The courteous response was not well received. Homemade moonshine had been going around for about 3 hours now, and this guy was now visibly drunk. He immediately took a drunken swing at me, missed me, and then blasted one of my aunts in the back of the head. And as expected, all hell broke out. Several family members jumped him and began delivering a beatdown of epic proportions. My grandmother and everyone else was screaming, and I was caught up in the mix. We really felt bad for the girlfriend. My cousin ended up having to take this poor idiot to the ER. Several family members ended up going as well due to fighting each other. And dinner never got served because of all the commotion, which caused the large serving table to spill over. It was a heartbreaking Thanksgiving, yet now satisfying to talk about years later. And this one is a guy after my own heart. A Stand-Up Guy by Moby323. This was years ago when electric ice cream makers were relatively new, or at least the affordable ones were new. So for Thanksgiving, my wife's family decided rather than having people bake desserts, after dinner we would all make homemade ice cream instead. A cute family bonding moment, right? We used good ingredients and made some really high-quality ice cream. It was fun and all the kids enjoyed it a lot. But when we were done making the ice cream, my wife's aunt put the ice cream aside and proceeded to pull out some shitty store-brand ice cream to serve to the kids. What was the logic behind this? They explained that the homemade ice cream was only for the adults, and the kids just got store-bought ice cream because they can't appreciate the good stuff anyway. Maybe that was true, but regardless, the kids really wanted to eat the homemade stuff simply because they made it themselves. They were really put out, and some tears were shed. I don't blame them. I spoke up and said, "Hey, don't be heartless. Let the kids have the stuff they made. I mean, give them at least a little bit." In my family, the kids are the focus on holidays. It's about the enjoyment we get by seeing them so happy. And anyway, my wife's aunts refused to listen, gave me shit about how, "You don't understand, you don't have kids." And I was like, yeah, but I was a kid, and I know how crappy I would feel. But they put their foot down and said no. There wasn't enough to go around. The kids eat the crappy ice cream. One aunt said, "If you want them to have some so badly, then you can share your portion with them." I said, "All right, okie dokie, that's what I'll do." So thank goodness for kind people. When I went to serve myself, I got a big-ass salad bowl and filled it all the way to the top, grabbed 6 spoons, and then went and sat at the kids' table, and we all just pigged out on my portion. Well, that didn't go over well with just about everybody. There was hardly any ice cream left, so what did the adults have to do? Pull the shitty ice cream out of the fridge and eat that instead, sulking and at the same time trying to maintain their dignity. It was pretty much angry silence for the next hour until we left. I was worried my wife was going to be pissed and tell me off once we got in the car, but instead she laughed and told me she loved me. Wasn't My Nanny, submitted by Midwest Gal. Just found your channel and hope I can get this to you for Thanksgiving, or whenever you can read it, if you will. When I was 13 years old, I lived in a tiny little town called Sulphur in Oklahoma. And it is tiny. Maybe 9,000 people live there total. My mom took off on my dad when I was 5 and my brother was 7. Skankho just told my dad one day she was going to LA or some shit and was gone. Never really saw her again, although every once in a while she sends me messages or emails, and I don't look at them. She can fuck right off. My grandparents jumped in to help take care of me and my brother, as my dad worked construction all year round and busted his ass for us. Still is a great man, and a great papa to my kids now, too. Guy never flinched when his wife bailed on him. I remember he just scooped us up together on our living room couch and said, "It's going to be different, but I've got you, my little muskrats." That's what he and my papa always called me and my brother, the muskrats. Anyway, my nanny and I were really close, as she was the only female figure in my day-to-day, and though she was a hard ass, she was the best. When she died, it took years off my papa's life, and I was really devastated. I still am sad in a lot of ways. Well, one day I heard my papa talking to my dad about her being gone. This was right around Thanksgiving that year. He was talking about how much he'd love to talk with her just one more time, and I got to thinking the same thing. This was the height of all those ghost hunter shows that I was all into, and somehow I got it into my head that maybe I could connect with my nanny through a Ouija board. I know, it was silly. I told my brother about it. His name is Scott. And 2 days before Thanksgiving, I also brought it up again to my cousin Millie when her family came to our house for the holiday. Yeah, we were stupid kids, but man, I thought I would give it a shot. Sorry about the long backstory. I want to get into the rest of it now. My nanny was buried in a cemetery not super far away from our house, maybe a mile and a half up the way. It was the Wednesday before Turkey Day, so me and my cousin and my brother were just sitting around talking and playing PlayStation when I brought it up again. "We should go visit Nanny and see if we can talk to her with my Ouija board," I said. I had the regular one that you can buy at Walmart. Of course, they both thought it was a good idea. Millie a little more thinking it was stupid, but she was on board. Guys, I'm talking about living in Sulphur. It's 90 miles outside of Oklahoma City. There wasn't that much to do. And I was really hopeful that maybe I could connect with my nanny. So I packed up some candles and my board in a backpack, and we decided to ride our bikes to the cemetery. It was clear and like 60 degrees out when we set off around 4:30. I knew it would be dark soon and figured that was the better time to do all of that stuff. Why? I don't know. Again, kid logic. We got to the cemetery gate and went in to find Nanny's spot. And there was no one else around. I mean, why would there be? It was now getting darker, and I set the board on the grass over Nanny's grave and then put candles between each of us. I started saying out loud that we wanted to speak to the spirit of my nanny before my brother and I put our hands on the pointer. I repeated that over and over because I saw a show once where another spirit came in and it wasn't who the people thought they were talking to. Foreshadowing for us. My brother and I put our hands on the pointer and waited for something to happen, but nothing did. I wasn't moving it, he wasn't moving it, nothing was moving it. Then Millie said, "Oh, for God's sake, let me try." She'd been balking the whole time about how silly this was, and nothing was real about it. So she put her hands on the pointer, and suddenly it started to move. I thought for sure she was just doing it to get a rise out of me, but she looked up at me as her hands kept moving, and her jaw dropped. "You're not moving that?" I whispered, and she looked at me kind of scared and said, "Nuh-uh." Her eyes were wide open. She started asking questions. "Who are we speaking with?" It just went to yes. She asked again, and the pointer went back to yes. I noticed the wind picked up a little at this point, and the candles were flickering and almost going out. Millie asked more questions about our family, and answers were coming. "What's the name of the boy Terry likes?" Something Millie wouldn't know, but it spelled out Jeff. I did have a crush on a guy named Jeff. "Who is Scott's favorite teacher at school?" Mr. Johnson came back. That was the truth. We were weirded out at that point, but then things got creepier. Millie asked, "When will I die?" And it slowly spelled out SOON. She looked up at me, and it was dark by now. Only the light from the candles played on the board on our faces. The wind picked up some more, and a weird noise came from off to the side of the cemetery. It was this low mewling sound. I don't know what it was. Millie said out loud again, "When?" And the board spelled back, SOON. Then the weird mewling started to sound like a woman wailing. Before Millie asked another question, the pointer spelled out DEATH. And that's when Millie took her hands off the thing. I grabbed it and asked if this was Nanny, and immediately it went to yes, but then pulled to no. I swear to God I was not moving that thing. I said it out loud. "Nanny, is that you?" Finally it stopped on no. The wind burst out and blew out the candles, and we heard a huge popping or cracking sound off to our left, and then a massive thud. A huge tree branch had broken off a tree maybe 15 feet from us and smashed on the ground. We all jumped, and I said, "This is over." But we didn't do the whole closeout thing. I just threw the board in my bag and left the candles and said, "Let's get the hell out of here." As we got on our bikes, the wailing got louder and seemed to be coming from the tree to our left where the branch had just fallen. Scott yelled, "Go!" and we all pedaled down the cemetery road back to the main road. Scott and I had lights on our bikes, but Millie had my dad's bike that didn't, so she just followed us along in the dark. As we rode as fast as we could back to our house, we heard the cemetery gates smash shut behind us. That wailing sound was getting louder, and now the wind was blowing like mad. Millie was practically crying, and so was I as we just rode as fast as we could, that wailing following right behind us. We got to my street, flew down it, and up our driveway to my open garage. Once we were inside, we jumped off our bikes. Scott hit the button for the door closer, and just as the door hit home, there was a loud boom that came from outside the door. The wailing had stopped, and we all stood looking at each other. "We've got to close that session out," I said, and explained that I'd seen it on a show that was the proper way to do things, and maybe this wailing would stop and whatever the hell was outside would go away. We were all so worked up, but I felt it would help, so I pulled the board back out, took the pointer, put it on it, and said, "We are done talking," and pushed it to goodbye. I wasn't sure if that was the correct way to do it, but that's all I did. The wind kept up, and we went inside totally freaking out. My dad and aunt and uncle and papa were in our living room, and my dad asked what that loud boom was. I lied and said it was my bike falling against a garbage can. The three of us went to my room, and I put the board away, and we all caught our breath, whispering about what had happened. We all agreed it was crazy, but did our Ouija board just cause all that? Or was everything that happened just coincidence? I mean, were we really moving the pointer and not really understanding or knowing that we were? Later that night, when everyone was going to bed, my dad called me over and asked if everything was okay. I could never lie to my dad, and I told him what we had done, and he gave me the "really, kid?" face. I told him we thought it was just a game, and how much I really wanted to talk to Nanny after I had heard Papa talking about it. But I told him all those things really happened, and then said we really thought something followed us home because of that wailing sound. It stayed with us the whole way home. He smiled and gave me a hug and said, "Kid, it was just your imagination." I went back to my bedroom, and Millie was still awake, and we talked about it for a long time that night. We finally fell asleep. The next morning I went into the kitchen, and my dad was standing there with a cup of coffee. He looked at me with a funny look and said, "Come here, kid, I want you to see this." I followed him out onto our porch and into the driveway, and he pointed at the garage door about 3 feet up. There were 2 handprints that embedded themselves into the metal of the door. Maybe 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch. Not a lot, but enough to see that there were 2 clear handprints there. That was what made the boom noise the night before. Something with 2 hands had smashed into our garage door and left that mark. Dad just looked at me and I said, "Imagination?" He put his arm around me and said, "Say some prayers and get right with this. It'll all be fine." I did, and it was. It turned out to be a great Thanksgiving. But that was the last time I ever played with a Ouija board or tried to talk to my nanny like that. I don't know what it was that we did talk to, or why whatever that was followed us home out of the cemetery. But I do know it wasn't Nanny. I'm sure none of your listeners will believe this story, but it's true, and I'm sharing it anyway. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Okay, here's 2 more that are kind of messed up. Not super scary, but man, this shows you how fucked up some families are. Meet the Family by Anonymous. I have a large family with an immense amount of borderline personality disorders. The worst instance was my Aunt A, who was going through a divorce, and Uncle B had been holding some of her belongings in storage while she got things settled. Well, Uncle B got drunk and told Aunt A that his new wife had sold a lot of her belongings because she wasn't paying for storage at their house. Well, my mother somehow got involved and tried yelling at Uncle B, and that's when Aunt C and Uncle D got involved and started a completely different argument. Meanwhile, Aunt A started chasing around Uncle B with a knife, and my cousin finally called the police. It was a full-out brawl by the time they got there, and Aunt A was taken away to a psych ward as she was sitting in her car with the knife threatening to kill herself. Yeah, this was also the first Thanksgiving I had brought my boyfriend, who's now my husband, home with me. Not a good choice. Jailbird and Moon Pie by Anonymous. It was the Thanksgiving that my aunt, henceforth referred to as Jailbird, had just gotten out of jail for serious criminal offenses involving gun trafficking. Her and my other aunt, I'll call Moon Pie, which was her favorite snack, also fitting because she was round like one too. They got into an argument over who bought my sister a gift, which she had had since she was 4 years old. Jailbird was only 14 at the time when the gift was given to my sister, making it impossible that she had done it. And so after my grandma said enough is enough, shut up you two, both of them moped around for a few hours, but their peace was made. Or so we thought. So Thanksgiving dinner arrived. It was going well until Moon Pie thought it'd be a good idea for her to carve the turkey, which my grandma, seeing no issue with that, let her do it. However, during the carving, Jailbird somehow was stabbed in the leg with the carving fork, and that's when all hell broke loose. My sister and I were told to go to our rooms, and we were staying with my grandmother for Thanksgiving weekend, so we occupied the guest bedroom. When we went into our room, we heard screaming and glass breaking, and then my sister and I came out to see what was happening, and holy God, everything was a mess. My parents and everyone else were trying to keep Jailbird and Moonpie away from each other, and not having much success. Grandma was just sitting there drinking her boxed wine and smoking away like nothing was happening while everything was happening. Anywho, long story short, I ended up calling the cops, and Jailbird and Moonpie now have both spent time in jail, not only outside of this, but on Thanksgiving too. Good job, morons. Bar Shift, submitted by Ace in the Hole. My story happened 2 years ago when I was 26. I was planning on driving to my parents' house about an hour away for Thanksgiving, and was going the night before just to be with family and maybe see a few friends. I mean, everybody knows Thanksgiving Eve is the biggest party night of the year outside of New Year's, and I wasn't super thrilled when I got a call from my boss to work that night after I had made my plans. And he was in a spot. I work at a popular bar in my city, and of course we do a big business on nights like this. But my coworker I'll call Tom up and quit that day. No notice, just said he was done and that was it. We had 3 other people on for the bar that night, but my boss said he really needed me as the only other people were newer and were relegated to working at a back bar where they sold only beer and not mixed drinks. My boss told me that he was also going to work and was putting off his plans, so I thought I shouldn't be a dick, and that I could make the drive after a shift that would take me to midnight. He promised me 2 extra days off and double time for an 8 to midnight shift. He was mostly a cool guy, so I did it and then packed up all my stuff in my Audi just so I could leave from the bar, drive to my parents' town, and still have an hour to see some buddies if they weren't already trashed when I got there. I got to work and we were hopping by 9. The only problem was we were still short-handed. My boss never came in and followed through with his plans to take off. Total clerk's move, if you get that reference. We were slammed, and I quickly found out I was going to be there until 2 a.m., at least, as the man in charge. There was no point in being pissed off about it, it's just the way it was going to be. So the night went on and everyone was getting really trashed as per usual, and as annoyed as I was just planning on what I was going to say to my boss when I got the chance. As the night started to dwindle and people realized we were at last call, there was a group of 3 guys by themselves who were more than 3 sheets to the wind. As the last song played and people were filing out after we made our final call, these 3 guys kept standing by the bar. I wandered down to them and let them know that we were closing and gave them the old, "You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here" speech. One guy muttered something under his breath, and I said, "Hey, fellas, let's not ruin the night. Be safe, but we're done here." One of the other guys was a little more vociferous and kept saying, "Oh, one more drink, man. Just come on, one more beer." I said, "Guys, not tonight. Let's just all get out of here and enjoy Thanksgiving." I didn't want to have to call over a bouncer and was just trying to be as cool as I could. Finally, the guy who was talking a lot said, "Okay, guys, let's go." But the one who was muttering looked right at me and said, "You're a fucking pussy. When I see you on the street, I'm going to kick your fucking ass." I'm very used to drunk talk, and I'm not a small fry kind of guy. I certainly don't start fights, but I don't even like the idea of being in them. That goes triple for people who are more than wasted, especially when they're in my bar. The 3 guys started to move towards the front door where Charlie, our bouncer, was standing. He was just saying goodnight to the rest of the people who were leaving. That's when the muttering guy turned around and whipped a bottle of beer right towards me. It sailed over my shoulder and smashed into some of our top shelf stuff behind me, and that was it. I yelled for Charlie, but he was already in action. He grabbed the guy by his arm and the back of his neck and literally threw him out the front door onto the sidewalk. The guy hit the concrete, and from inside I could hear him howling in pain, and his 2 buddies ran out to help him. I came out from around the back of the bar as Charlie was telling them to just get the fuck out of there and not come back. The muttering guy got to his feet and was very wobbly when I got to the door, along with 2 of the other bartenders and another bouncer. Muttering guy was yelling about his knee, and when he looked up and saw me, he said I was a dead man and he was going to fuck me up. Charlie just told him to get going or it was going to get worse for him. The 2 other guys grabbed their friend and started walking down the sidewalk, with the muttering guy limping pretty badly. I didn't care, fuck him. The sidewalks were a little icy, and anything we told the cops would be what the cops were going to hear if it came to that. There was no way they were going to believe those guys' story. Charlie closed the door, I locked it, and we got to our basic once-over cleanup. The last thing I was going to do was spend more time there that night, and I didn't want anyone else to either. So we got the basics done, hosed down the bar mats behind the bar, and our staff took all the garbage and bins full of cups and beer bottles out to the dumpster. I told everybody, that's it, we're going home, thanks for working tonight, happy Thanksgiving. I was turning off the lights when I heard some yelling outside, but figured it was just other revelers on their way home. When I looked out our front windows, there was no one there. I just shrugged, ready for my drive back to my hometown. I was going to miss my friends, but was hoping on seeing them later that day. I locked up and went out and got into my Audi. I got onto the surface streets to take me to the highway, navigating through people still wandering around in the streets. And when I finally got onto the on-ramp, I noticed a car right behind me, but just figured it was someone quite inebriated or just not paying attention. I mean, they were right on my ass. When I got onto the highway, I stayed in the far right lane to allow the person to pass. But they didn't. They stayed right there, on my ass. They were so close I couldn't see the front end of the car, and was looking to see who it was at the wheel. I accelerated a bit, but the car stayed right behind me. I decided to change lanes to see if the person was just going to take an off-ramp that was coming up pretty quick. But they followed me over into the middle lane. As I was cursing under my breath about idiots on the road, the car swerved into the far left lane and then pulled up alongside me. Well. When I looked over, it was the three musketeers who had been escorted out of my bar. I guess they waited for me to leave and were now pulling this crap. In the back seat was the muttering guy who threw the bottle at me. And now he threw yet another bottle at me. It smashed just underneath my driver's side window, and that's when I realized my phone was dead. I was going to try to call 911 through my car, but the Bluetooth hadn't connected. The car was getting very close to me, and I was checking all my mirrors, seeing no one behind me. I remember thinking, great, I'm going to have to handle this without anyone witnessing what these guys are doing. I moved to the far right lane again, and they followed right over, and another bottle came my way, but it didn't hit my car. I hit the gas and pulled away from them, thinking that I would get off at the next exit. But they once again got behind me, and just as the exit was coming up, I feigned like I was going to get off, but then relying on the handling of my car, I swerved back onto the highway, hoping that they wouldn't be able to make the same cut. There was a concrete barrier that popped up right after the off-ramp. Unfortunately, they did make the same move and sped up alongside me again. This time the guy in the front seat was hanging out his arm and giving me the finger and yelling something. I hit the brakes and gave myself enough time to swerve behind them and then over into the left lane, and then I hit the gas again. They were driving some sort of Honda, and I figured now was the time to really put my Audi to work. I got up to about 125 miles an hour, and they were now way behind me on a still non-busy highway. I could still see their lights, and I was trying to put as much distance between us before I could get to another exit, get to a gas station I knew was there, as I did need fuel, and then plug my phone in and call 911. I was also hoping there were more people at the gas station just in case they followed me. When the exit came up, they were just a pair of dots behind me, and I didn't use my directional. I just flew off the ramp back onto a surface street and went up to the gas station. I immediately plugged my phone in once I got there and called 911. I told them about my situation, and they asked if the car had followed me there. It hadn't, and I continued to talk to the person on the line, and she basically said if the car wasn't following me anymore, I should just fuel up and get to where I needed to be. I explained to her that I still had a long drive and had to get back onto the highway as I was heading home for Thanksgiving. She basically just wished me luck and said to call back if something else happened. There wasn't anything she could do. This was based on the fact that they had no idea where the car could possibly be at that time. I even told them who the people were, and I could probably get their names based on the fact that they used credit cards in my bar. But the dispatcher said I would have to do that in person, and that was something she couldn't handle on a 911 call. Great. I got out of my car after hanging up and looked around and didn't see any sign of the other car or the guys. I quickly filled up and thought for a second about getting some coffee, but thought better of it and just needed to get out of there. I got back into my car, got back onto the highway, and got up to a little over the speed limit. I knew what I had done earlier was running a very high risk as fast as I was going. I mean, it was Thanksgiving, and I figured even if I did get caught, I at least could explain to the cops who stopped me that I was being followed and harassed. But then I thought all I had was a decent-sized dent on my driver's side door, and no witnesses to what had actually happened. I'm sure even though I was sober, the cops would not have been happy with me. Traffic had picked up a little, and while it wasn't heavy, I was happy to see other cars here and there heading in the same direction I was. I kept my eyes peeled for the other car, but didn't see anything for about 15 minutes. But of course my story isn't over, and I'm pretty sure everyone has already figured out that the guys came back. Actually, they were on the side of the road when I passed them. I noticed them right away, even though I was in the far left lane. They certainly noticed me. As I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw the car pull back onto the road. Here's where the real cat and mouse chase started. They continued to follow me, and I now called 911 again and started swerving in and out of cars. Yeah, I know, extremely dangerous and stupid, especially with the fact that I knew many of the drivers I was swerving in and around were probably drunk as hell. I didn't care. I mean, I do now, but I didn't then. I just wanted to get away from those guys. They didn't follow directly behind me, but kept changing lanes as I was maneuvering as best I could. And finally, I got to where there were no cars in front of me, and that's when they once again got right on my ass. All while this is happening, I was telling the dispatcher about the earlier call I had, and the fact that the three guys were still there. I heard a loud bump on the back of my car and realized they had just thrown something else at my rear window. 911 was still asking me questions, and I said, "Look, they're throwing stuff at me now. I know you can't really do a lot. I'm coming up on the state line, but can you please let the troopers know up ahead what's going on and that these guys are still following me?" The dispatcher said she would, but I didn't really believe her. She was so nonchalant about the whole thing, and I was crazy thinking in my mind, wondering if it was the same woman I had talked to earlier. We got to the state line, and the guys were still on my ass. They dropped back, and I figured they were going to stop as we were now in a different state. But nope, they took one last fast run up alongside me, and that's when I saw the passenger in the front holding a gun out of the window. All things being honest, I had no idea if it was real or a BB gun or what, but that scared the living shit out of me, so I hit the gas once again and buried the needle. My adrenaline was running so hot I wasn't thinking about anything other than the road in front of me. And about 5 minutes later, I checked all my mirrors, and the car was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief as more traffic picked up, people getting onto the highway, and I was slowly calming down. Checking my mirrors, I didn't see them again and figured they had finally given up. And then it dawned on me, after all this time, I never got the license plate. But then I remembered I still had their names and planned on filing charges when I got back to town. I was also going to call the next day to let the police know everything that had happened and that I was going to submit their names as soon as I could. The rest of the drive wasn't eventful, and I got home in one piece. My dad had stayed up waiting for me, and I told him everything that happened, and he just shook his head. He just looked at me and said, "I guess you did everything in your power to stay as safe as you needed to." But at the same time, I could also tell he was very concerned about the speeds that I was driving at, and what I was doing to get away from those guys. Oh well, that's just a worried dad. I ended up having a decent Thanksgiving, and when I did get back into my town, I did get their names and reported them to the police. Again, all things being honest, nothing happened other than the muttering guy getting in trouble for throwing the beer bottle in the bar. The police said they didn't have any evidence to press charges on any of the things that they had done on the road. No witnesses, and I couldn't prove that the damage to my door had been done by them. So basically, they got away with it. A small charge for the damage done to the bar, and that was it. That's my story. It was a pretty messed up situation, and even trying to enjoy Thanksgiving with my family was not the easiest, as my nerves were still running on overdrive. Just goes to show you that sometimes people get out of hand on holidays. I haven't seen them since, and the only satisfaction I got out of all of this was yelling at my boss for making me work as long as I did. As I mentioned, he's a good guy, but what a total asshole that night. Looking back, I'm just glad that nothing else happened, and I'm very glad that I never found out if that gun was real or not. Everybody stay safe. I hope you all enjoy your Thanksgiving. Jeff, submitted by Sandra. I'm a 27-year-old woman. I've been in recovery for 6 years, and I'm a thankful recovering alcoholic. I've been a member of a 12-step group for my 6 years of sobriety, and am very involved in service, helping others to achieve the good things that I have without alcohol. Every year I volunteer with my home group on Thanksgiving Day. It's a meeting that involves serving a potluck Thanksgiving dinner for those who don't have family or just want to share in recovery with a good meal. It's usually a pretty big meeting, and I know lots of them go on in my area. Some people spend their days going from meeting to meeting. God bless them. Always so happy to see people staying sober and being around those who love them, who might be on their own otherwise. These meetings are always a lot of work, but they're super fun and very rewarding. However, I wanted to share this one time where things weren't so good. I got to the center where we hold our meetings early to help set up and welcome people in. Just get things organized for the meal and meeting. Tons of laughs and really great people. And about an hour before the meeting was set to start, people were still bringing in dishes to pass. And that's when a guy who I had never seen before come into the meeting and realized he was early. Of course, we didn't tell him to leave. We just asked him to jump in and help out after introducing ourselves. There were about 10 of us working together. He introduced himself as Jeff and said it was his first time at this meeting. And that's what my group is all about, welcoming all who are seeking to stop drinking and enjoying time with others who don't. Jeff seemed real nice and immediately began helping out and was getting along with everyone. That's usually how it works. About 15 minutes before the meeting was to officially start with a speaker, I lost track of where Jeff was as people were coming into the center and commenting on all the good food that was being laid out. A little before we got things started, I noticed Jeff was back but seemed a little off. He was still very engaging and laughing, but I got the suspicion that perhaps he had gone outside or someplace else in the building and had something to drink. This is also something that is not unheard of. We get all kinds of people in all phases of life, some sober, some not, but we welcome them all with open arms. After a few minutes, one of my friends in the program came over to me and mentioned the same thing that I had noticed. I went over to talk to Jeff and didn't smell anything on him, but he certainly was in a different mood. I kept it in the back of my mind as the meeting got going and just settled in to enjoy the speaker and then got everyone situated for the meal. Tons of food, coffee, non-alcoholic drinks, and fellowship kept the merriment going, and everyone was enjoying themselves. I wasn't trying to take anyone's inventory, but I was looking around for Jeff and noticed that he was disappearing every once in a while. Of course, others noticed, and we pretty much determined that Jeff was drinking outside in his car. One of the old-timers went over to talk to Jeff about what was going on, and he finally admitted that yes, he had been drinking. A small group of people went over to Jeff and talked to him about what was going on and how they could help and see what he was struggling with that day. I wasn't part of that, but I heard later that he had broken down and confessed that he just couldn't stop drinking. But this was the place for him to be, a place of recovery and a place to get started. The meeting and dinner wrapped up and we all pitched in to clean up. I was planning on heading home for a bit before going to my family's and enjoying Thanksgiving with them. Some of the guys convinced Jeff to either get a ride or an Uber home, but he insisted he lived nearby and was just going to walk. No one had any idea how much he had to drink, but no one wanted him behind the wheel, and he apparently agreed to that. I said goodbye and started my walk home as I didn't live far from the center either. That was one perk of having that home group. It was always in walking distance. I'd put an earbud in and was just listening to some music as I was walking down the sidewalk alongside a fairly busy road back to my apartment. It's not the best part of town, but my apartment really kicks ass on the inside, even though it's not in the greatest neighborhood. I was planning on moving out soon, and I'll get to that later. I moved a little bit sooner than I had planned. As I was walking, I just got the feeling that someone was watching me. The sidewalks were fairly empty, with only a couple of people walking around. I got to an intersection with a gas station and a Walgreens, and remembered that I wanted to grab some toothpaste and deodorant. so I ducked inside and got my stuff. I thought about feeling the way that I felt, but shrugged it off and started thinking about the rest of my day with my family. I was really looking forward to that. When I got outside, I looked through the parking lot back towards the sidewalk, and for a second, I thought I saw Jeff at the corner. But I looked down, and when I looked back, there was no one there. There was another building next to the Walgreens, but again, I just figured it was the experience that I had in the meeting, and that was why Jeff was on my mind. To be honest, I had been saying some prayers for him, that he would find sobriety, at least for that day. I continued walking to my apartment, and when I got to the front door, I shuffled my bag in my hand from Walgreens and punched in my door code. Once you get into the vestibule, you have to punch in again for the doors to get into the building. And if anyone were to visit me, they'd have to use a phone to call my apartment, and you can buzz them in, just like on Seinfeld. I got to my apartment and was going to take a shower when my intercom buzzer went off. I hit it and said, "Hello?" but no one answered. I waited for a few minutes to see if whoever was there was still there and going to buzz me again, but nothing happened. I got my shower and was drying my hair when I heard a knocking at my apartment door. I assumed it was one of my neighbors, so I wrapped myself in a towel and went to the door to look out the peephole. There was no one standing there, so I just said aloud, "Hello?" No one answered, and I went back to drying my hair and get ready. When I was finishing up, the knocking came again, and I quickly ran over to the door to look out the peephole. But again, no one was there. I was starting to get irritated by this, so I immediately texted both my neighbors on either side, as well as the guy across the hall. After a few minutes, they all texted back that they weren't home and wished me a happy Thanksgiving. I did the same, and then I texted the superintendent to see if he had been trying to get a hold of me, but he let me know that he was actually in Florida, and he also wished me a happy Thanksgiving. I gathered up my things and was getting ready to go to my car when another knock came at my door. By this point, I was more than irritated and was close enough to the door to whip it open. There stood Jeff. For a minute, we were both silent as we looked at each other, and I finally said, "What are you doing here? How do you even know I live here?" In the back of my mind, I knew exactly how I knew I was here, because he obviously followed me home. How he got into the building was another question, but I also assumed that someone from the building had come in and allowed him to walk through without knowing who he was. That has happened from time to time. Jeff just stood there for a second, and I could tell he was even drunker than he was at the meeting, and he just said he wanted to say hi and give me another happy Thanksgiving wish. I told him I appreciated that, but he should really leave, and I told him that it wasn't right for him to be in my building, and it certainly wasn't right for him to follow me home. He just gave me this goofy smile and stood there and then said, "I'm sorry. I thought you said I could call you if I needed anything." I gently told him that he could, but following me home was not okay. I told him that he needed to go home, stop drinking, and try to get to 2 more meetings that day. I told him to download an app on his phone where he could find meetings to get to, and to call anyone else that he had numbers of if he needed a ride. He just stared at me blankly, and then kind of wandered off down the hall to the elevator. I shut my door and stood there, pretty pissed off that he had the brass ones to do what he had just done. I called my sponsor and let her know what happened, interrupting her Thanksgiving meal, but she just told me to chalk it up as another drunk guy, and to just say a prayer for him. I gathered up my things once more and headed to the elevator. I was looking down at my phone when the door opened. I just wandered inside. When I looked up, there was Jeff. The doors shut behind me and the elevator started to go down. Then I told him once again that he needed to leave, and at this point, he tried to move towards me to give me a hug. I backed up against the wall of the elevator and told him in no uncertain terms that he was out of line, and that if he didn't get away from me, I was going to call the police. That's when he knocked the bag out of my hand and shoved me into the wall. He immediately jumped on me and tried to kiss me, and locked his leg between mine and kicked out one of my legs from under me. I slid to the floor on my butt, at this point screaming for him to get away from me. It seemed like forever for the elevator to get down to the lobby floor, and he kept pawing at me and telling me that he needed my help and that I should just give it to him. I was reaching for the pepper spray in my purse while battling him with my other hand, and I did get a good crack across his face. He stood up and then raised his hand to hit me, but his drunkenness left him a little off balance, and he was a little slow about things, so I was able to roll to my side while his hand smashed against the elevator wall. Thankfully, the elevator stopped and the doors opened up. Two of the residents who lived below me were waiting for the elevator. I screamed that this guy was attacking me, and Jeff took that moment to push past him, knocking the one woman onto her butt as he ran towards the front door. I quickly called 911 on my iPhone and told the person who answered that a man had just attacked me in my apartment building and was exiting our front building, and gave her the address. She asked if everyone was okay, and I said yes, but this was not okay, and someone needed to apprehend this guy. Jeff made it out the door by this time, and I was telling the two tenants what was going on. I was pretty open about my sobriety with everyone at this point and didn't care about my anonymity. About 10 minutes later, a cop showed up, and I gave him a full description of Jeff, and he said he was going to check the perimeter of the building after I told him I was going to my car to get to my family's house. I was shaken but not stirred. I know, bad pun. He told me to wait there and came back another 10 minutes later while the two tenants stayed with me. The cop said that he didn't find Jeff around the building, but he was going to walk me to my car and suggested that I stay at my parents' for the rest of the day, and he would be letting everyone know who was on patrol to drive by and keep an eye out for this guy if he came back. I wanted to make a formal complaint, but it was pretty hard to do seeing as I don't really know who he was and didn't even know if Jeff was his real name. The cop walked me to my car, and I got in, and he gave me his card and told me to call him if I needed anything or if any more trouble happened. He did ask me again if I was okay and if I needed medical attention. I told him no, but I was going to follow up with everyone. So I was warming up my car, and when I started to pull out of our lot, there was Jeff across the street watching me. I fumbled for my iPhone, but now he was racing towards me and suddenly was at the side of my car trying to open my door, screaming for me to let him in or for me to get out. He started pounding on my driver's side window and kept saying that I was supposed to help him. Finally, I got 911 dialed just as he broke, or rather spiderwebbed, my driver's side window. I looked on in horror as his arm and hand were now bloody, and he kept smashing on the window. I was trying to scramble over to the other side of my car while screaming into the phone about Jeff being back, and once I got on the other side of the car, he ran around to that side and tried getting in, leaving blood all over that window too. I was still screaming at the dispatcher, who was trying to calm me down, when suddenly Jeff disappeared from the side of my car. I looked around and saw that the cop who had originally been out was still there, and now had Jeff, and was throwing him towards the back of my car. I started to get out, but the cop yelled for me to stay where I was as he was struggling with Jeff. Jeff was putting up a hell of a fight, when I heard the cop yell out, "Taser," and that crackling noise that you hear on TV. Jeff let out a scream and fell to the ground, but got back to his feet pretty quickly. It seemed like forever that they were struggling, but it was really only a minute or so before the other cop cars pulled into my lot, and all these cops jumped out to help with the first cop to get Jeff. Another taser was shot at him, and this one worked, and they were able to get him onto the ground and handcuff him. At this point, I was told I could get out of the car and was led away from the immediate scene to give yet another report of what was going on. Jeff was still screaming his head off that I promised to help him, and that this was all my fault for lying. They got him into a car, and I was unbelievably shaken. Turns out, of course, his name was not Jeff. I'm not going to share his real name here, but he was under the influence of not only alcohol but PCP. After time, I found out that he was a pretty well-known offender in my town and had a habit of going to various meetings and organizations and doing the same kind of thing he did to me. He had never been caught, but he had been reported many times, and there was never any evidence against him, so basically he was getting away with it. He was going everywhere and anywhere. Self-help groups, church groups, 12-step groups, you name it. Any place that he could show up and stalk people. The cops took him away, and I called my dad and asked him to come get me after telling him what had happened. My dad said he'd be there right away and came and got me after I parked my car and the police did their thing looking at it. I did press charges, and Jeff got some jail time for a variety of things. I want to stress that this is not how my program or the program works, It was an anomaly for my home group. Nothing like this has ever happened, and nothing like it has ever happened since. But the police... Home Alone on Thanksgiving, submitted by Larry Defense. This happened in 2017. I'd been married for 7 years and we had 2 wonderful children, and we just moved into a new house and we were redoing a lot of it. Scratch that. I was redoing a lot of it. When I mean a lot of stuff, I mean a lot of stuff. There are some things that I won't do on my own, like electrical and plumbing. I know the basics, but also know my limits. But I am very good at roughing, drywalling, finishing, and that sort of stuff. The place wasn't really a fixer-upper, but there were things that I wanted to change immediately, and that included a revamped finished basement, and they also had this large patio on the back of the house that I wanted to turn into an additional family room. The reasoning behind that was because there was also another patio off the patio for our pool, so it could serve as a new family room off of our existing family room, and also kind of a pool house. I don't mean to waste a lot of time talking about that specific project, but it does play a huge role into what happened here. That year I'd been working full-time, doing this stuff for the kids, but also working late into the nights and also very long weekends on the house. I wanted everything done by Christmas, and that included a lot of other stuff inside. But this room was important to me because I was putting in a wood-burning fireplace, and it was going to be where our Christmas tree and all that stuff was. Suffice it to say, with 2 little kids in school and working long hours, it didn't take long for me to come down with something, and of course it came right before Thanksgiving. Normally we would host Thanksgiving for my brothers and my in-laws, but with the house ripped up and me being sick, my in-laws decided to take over, and as much as I was sad I was going to miss it, I decided to hang back and just sit on my ass and try to get better. It sounds funny, but as a 25-year-old I would have laughed at such a thing. But now that I'm in my early 30s, I know how important health is, and as much as I was bummed to miss a holiday, I wanted to be healthy for the next one. So my family took off to my in-laws about an hour away, and I was just going